Welcome, everybody, to the Port Phillip EcoCentre's Culture and Nature Festival. My name is Reiko, and I'm an educator at the Port Phillip EcoCentre. And it's a great pleasure here today to welcome you all to our last session of the festival, Zero Waste Tips from Around the World. We've been having such amazing stories being told throughout the festivals and learning a lot about multicultural Victoria and how different cultures connect to nature's our plants and our animals through things like food, traditional folklore stories, and different things that they do around the garden or being active in our environment and volunteering. And today's session is about what we can do on a day-to-day at home to reduce waste. Now, before we begin, I would like to start with some housekeeping. Today's Zoom webinar, we have a Q&A function for you all, to the attendees. It's in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom there with the Q&A icon, and you'll be able to ask any questions you have to the panelists through that Q&A bar. The chat function on Zoom is disabled for attendees today, but if you have any questions or comments, just pop up in the Q&A tool and we can engage through that. I'd also like to let everybody know that our session here today is recorded and live streaming on YouTube on the EcoCentre's YouTube channel, EcoCentre TV. It also has all the previous sessions recorded there as well. So if you've missed anything, jump onto YouTube and you can watch our full festival on YouTube. Now, I would like to open this session, Zero Waste Tips from Around the World, with a big Woman Jika to everybody. Woman Jika means welcome, we're gathering with purpose. And today we're gathering with the purpose to learn how we can reduce our environmental footprint, particularly in relation to waste, to look after country, look after the land and waters. I would like to acknowledge our traditional owners of the lands that we are on, the Wurundjeri and the Bunwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and pay my respects to any First Nations people who are watching this event today. I would also like to acknowledge, as is the theme of this festival, the continuing traditions and cultures of the First Peoples and their custodianships to look after our land, waters, and biodiversity. And we are all custodians of this land, and there's a lot that we must learn from them. And we had some great sessions on the festival, opening with First Nations connection to nature, where Bunwurrung man Jaden Williams spoke about cultural stories from Bunwurrung and the teachings from Banjo, their great creator. We also had a panel talk on Thursday called On Our Nature Connections, with a really fantastic panel, including Dean Stewart, who spoke about how he runs Aboriginal cultural walks in Melbourne and tells his stories and sings to the land with their participants. So if you missed that, jump onto YouTube and you can watch that there. I would also like to acknowledge that these lands were never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So today's session, Zero Waste Tips from Around the World, we have three presenters, including myself, from various different cultural backgrounds, and we're all living in Melbourne and different ancestry, I guess. So I would like to introduce them. Emily Huey will be our first presenter. Emily was born on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country of Hong Kong and Chinese descent. And Emily is a passionate international baccalaureate educator and one of the co-founders of Zero Waste Victoria and Zero Waste Festival. We also have Hannah Brooks joining us today. Hannah is originally from the wild Wicklow Hills of Ireland and is passionate about all aspects of sustainability and will discuss Irish culture and zero waste initiatives. Hannah is the director of Howell and Associates, a local business which specializes in communications and business development services for the creative, sustainability, music, and startup sectors. And I'm Reiko Yamada from the Portfolio EcoCentre. I'm an educator and project officer at the EcoCentre, and it's been really great working with also my multicultural and migrant communities and learning about how we can foster inclusion and different views of people see our natural world into sustainability to improve our well-beings and connect deeply with our culture and the local environment. So thank you, Emily and Hannah, for joining us today. Without further ado, I might pass on to Emily, and she will share with us her stories from her culture as well as some zero waste tips. So thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Reiko. Just going to share my screen. There we go. So welcome everyone. I'm Emily Huey. Thank you for that beautiful introduction and thank you for inviting me in today. I'm very excited to speak a little bit about my story, but also share some zero waste tips that I've learned from my family and what I do now as well. So looking at how culture and nature has helped shape me. As Reiko mentioned, I was born on Wurundjeri Wurrung country, so I was born in Melbourne, but my family is from Hong Kong and that's where a lot of my culture and my roots are from, so that's what I'll be sharing today. Okay, and I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. I would like to say Wominjeka as well, to come with purpose, and acknowledge that I'm on Bunurong and Wurundjeri country, acknowledge the 65,000 years of knowledge, ways of knowing, being and doing, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. As a guest and modern custodian of this land, I would like to begin with my family story. So my family came from Hong Kong, before that sort of an area in southern China. So what has been really fascinating and really amazing throughout this time of kind of putting this together has been talking to my family and hearing all the stories. So I'd love to share some with you today. As part of growing up with my grandparents' story is I had the fortune of going back and seeing what the area was like and going and pumping my own water and going and using the bucket, which was the toilet, and seeing the ox and seeing the rice fields and really being fortunate to kind of see where my grandparents came from. And I guess along the way, I've picked up little tips and tricks, and one of the things was, what they did was just, things that we think would be very simple, but are things that we can still apply today. So things like saving water, which we do, but it was back then, I think we can learn a lot from that. So not only from my family, but also from Indigenous practices. So that's incredibly exciting. So our family spent a long time in Hong Kong. So I've got a lot of Hong Kong family there, and also in Canada. And growing up kind of in Melbourne, but being able to go back, some of the things was really just listening to the stories. So my family spent a lot of time kind of, when you think of Hong Kong, you don't think of greenery and that sort of stuff. The reality of Hong Kong is more like this. So this is outside one of my grandparents' windows. You kind of see the beautiful space back behind the buildings before you could actually see the rivers. And then what has happened is there's a lot of reclaiming of the land, and then there's more buildings coming up. So that shift in time has also shaped how I've seen it and how our zero waste or our general practices have changed. And then kind of growing up and seeing the space that they lived in, like little tiny spaces, which were quite shared between a lot of people. So it was a tiny apartment living, but you know, they had 10 people in that place. And then they came to Australia. My dad studied high school and university here. My mum came out and learned English, and a lot of my relatives opened up Chinese restaurants and things like that, and we had big family gatherings. And so I've been very fortunate to connect through to culture and to family through these ties. And even though I've been brought up here, my parents forced me to speak Cantonese. Thank you very much to my parents for that hard work, because I really value that. And I am so honoured to carry on some of the traditions. Okay, so my zero waste journey, it's not so perfect journey. As you can see, I've got plastic straw there, but that's okay. And same with when we were in Hong Kong and spending some time there, it's also become a very, you know, convenience, a lot of packaging and a lot of stuff there. But we were doing little things that we could. So there I am bringing my own little bag, collecting some ice creams in our little cooler bag to take home. So one of the big things throughout that I've learned from our family is that, you know, some of the things they don't consider zero waste because there was no such thing as that terminology. But as we unpacked it, it was beautiful to kind of see some of the things that we've done. So what did I learn? From the sort of space of living in the country and saving water, and one of the things we did was, because we had to work for our resources, we appreciated our resources a lot more. And that was one of the key sort of things that I learned from spending time there, because we had to spend the time pumping the water and very carefully carrying it in the buckets. We really valued the water a lot more than, I guess, now when we just switch on the tap and those sort of things. So sometimes when we make things a little bit less convenient, we appreciate it a lot more. And that was one of my key takeaways from that. And sometimes going back to simple ways of being is actually a real advantage to learning and appreciating where things come from. And through this practice, it's something that I've carried on in my education setting, talking about embodied energy of where things come from. So whether it's before eating and thinking about a journey of going back, okay, well, how did the meal get to where you are today? So each component, like how did it get to you? Your parents packed it, they had to go to the shops to get it, but they had to earn money to get it. There are people at the shops, you know, tending to it, the transport, the growing, all that sort of stuff. So that's been a real sort of key sort of thing that I've brought in from what I've learned from my family into what I teach as well. And the incredible thing of my grandparents, what I learned from them was the art of growing my own things. So even though I live in an apartment, I have a balcony and I'm growing things there. So from my grandparents, I learned a lot, and including my great auntie Joan, who has a stunning garden. It's incredible to learn like little things about seed saving, growing your own food, sharing your own food with people as well, and that important part of when you grow things you can share and you learn the seasons. And so I spent a lot of my childhood at my grandparents' place in the garden. So they took out like the grass and that sort of area, and they built a veggie patch garden at home. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. And yeah, just learning to appreciate, learning to find little caterpillars and all these beautiful things that I think is really important in our zero waste journey, of stopping and appreciating those simple little things and noticing what's in season, doing things like seed saving so we don't have to go out and buy new seedlings or buy new seeds and things like that. And also from that experience of sharing what we've grown. So often you have excess, and learning how to make different foods, and that's been really important in our lives as well. The other thing is, from when we kind of grew up, we're looking at how in Hong Kong we lived in these small sort of places, so apartment sort of blocks, and you could actually rent just a bed, just one bunk and that sort of thing. So from that I learned a lot about community and how sharing of resources is really important, and that how that really builds that into where we are, where I am at the moment. So going in and sharing, because of my apartment living, that's been really big in COVID, connecting with my neighbours, and just, you know, asking, does anyone have this, instead of going out to buy something. It's been a really lovely thing, because people often go, oh yeah, I've got it in my storage cage. And so that community living is just really important, and that reduces your footprint, but also builds a connection with each other. And in the middle is my mum. That's her English language group. And from that, one of the key sort of things is learning about diversity. So it was the first time my mum was saying that she had connected with so many people from different cultures and was learning so much. And from that, we've had these beautiful connections continue. So learning from other cultures, from nonnas, and from the beauty of kind of learning lots of different practices and pulling them together in your practice. So today is going to be really beautiful to listen to what Reiko and Hannah is sharing as well. And the final one is about cooking here. So some of the things are learning how to kind of cook in ways like how we would cook one thing, we would share excess, and we would be able to also kind of look at really clever ways. So, for example, when we make soup, there's often a lot of leftover bits and pieces. So from the soup, if there's meat and that sort of thing, we've been able to feed it to our dog. Veggies, we've been able to sometimes freeze and reuse into another stock, or fed it to our worm farm, and slow cookers and that sort of thing. That sort of stuff has always been part of how our family's grown up, because that was how we had cooked our soup previously. And just being able to utilize each part. So some part of the Chinese culture is being able to, with the food, is looking at parts that you might not have eaten usually in, say, a Western sort of culture sort of sense, or in the modern culture sense. And that's been really important for me, because I grew up eating it and I actually didn't know what it was. So it wasn't until later that I was like, oh, it's actually congealed pig's blood. And I was like, oh, okay, is that what I was eating? Or like jellyfish and that sort of stuff. It was like, but because I'd grown up eating it, it was okay. So then it became like, okay, well, what else can we eat and what else can we utilize? So utilizing parts of vegetables and of meat, if you eat meat, and really finding new ways of cooking. It's not so much new, it's probably new to you, but lots of different cultures have used different parts. And I think it's, you know, that's the really important part of learning that, but also connecting with what's in season. And yeah, farmers markets and that sort of stuff has been really important to how I've approached that in my life. So some of the things that I've learned from zero waste, and as I've kind of come along, is it's been really amazing to apply it with our not-for-profit Waste Victoria, and have festivals where we can engage community. And that's been a really important thing of like not only learning, but being able to share what I've learned with others and connecting people, because often people feel that, oh, I'm the only one who's trying to do this. But that's been the beauty of our Facebook group and our community events and things like that, connecting like-minded people. So the reality, it's a bit messy and it's okay. So this is my grandparents' place in Hong Kong. Because we want to utilize everything, they've found, you know, really clever ways of storing things, and sometimes things get piled up. And because we care about zero waste, it's just looking at like, okay, what can I do in where I am with what I've got? So can you share it? Can you give it away? Free cycling, Facebook Marketplace, great place to give things away, buy nothing groups, things like that. And take the opportunity to listen and connect, create opportunities to really speak with people from different diversity, different cultures, and learn from each other, speak to your elders, speak to your family. I think that's a really, really important part. And I'd love to share with you a question at the end is, what has shaped you to be who you are? or you could think about who has helped shape you. So make sure when you are doing zero waste, do it your way. Doesn't have to be perfect, but give it a try. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I think we're going to leave the questions until our Q&A. So I'll hand it back to Reiko. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Em, and thank you for that prompt. What has shaped you on your zero waste journey? I'll be really excited to hear what what our viewers have and what shaped them. So thanks for that prompt. It's been really cool to see how you talk about your zero waste journey, starting from that it wasn't perfect. You had plastic straws. I'm sure we all have gone through that, but also that it's not an individual experience. It's things that you learn from your family, from your community, and it's something that you can share. It's just not about, say, reducing packaging. It's about being resourceful, passing on seeds, sharing food, learning how to cook with different parts of food. That's all about zero waste. So thank you so much, Emily, for sharing that with us. Now I'd like to pass on to Hannah, who'll share with us about her Irish cultural heritage and some of the things that she's been doing recently in Melbourne. So thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Reiko. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Hannah. I'd like to also start by acknowledging the traditional Aboriginal owners of country throughout Victoria and pay my respects to them, their culture, and their elders past, present, and future. So thanks to the EcoCentre for having me today to talk to you about some zero waste initiatives in Ireland, where I grew up. And I'll also just be tapping on a few little tips from music perspective and what you might do at a music festival. So I grew up in County Wicklow, which is just south of Dublin on the east coast of Ireland. And that's a little map for you there, just to show you a little bit better. So just below Dublin there. And it's the Garden of Ireland. So I was very lucky to grow up around a lot of nature and basically in rural Ireland. I spent time near Glendalough when I was younger, and then was lucky enough to go over to the coast near the beach when I was a bit older. So I'm going to give you some examples of when I grew up and how I've seen it evolving until now, and we'll also speak to my grandmother's tips. She lived in Dublin, and my aunt, her daughter, who lives down in the south of Ireland in on the Cork-Kerry border in a Gaeltacht area. So that's a traditional Irish area where the first language they speak is Irish. So that's just a little bit of an overview of ERA, which is the Irish word for Ireland, and our population, and just to give you an idea of how much smaller it is in terms of living in Australia. So this is my earliest memories of my grandmother used to get milk delivered to her house by the milkman back in the 80s with the milk bottles. And I remember her collecting them and then leaving them out that evening for the milkman to collect the next time. And I think in between, then we went to cartons and plastic, and now we're seeing in Ireland a return to the milk bottle. And in actual fact, this was taken 2 nights ago by my aunt. She now gets her milk bottles from her local shop, which is delivered by the local farm and dairy, and she brings them back in next time she heads in there. So it's good to see that those initiatives are coming back around. So a couple of other things that I remember from my childhood. There I am, maybe 2 or 3, looking potentially a bit like a boy, and that's because I was dressed in my brother's t-shirt by the looks of things. So I grew up with a lot of hand-me-downs in our family. I was very lucky to have older cousins who were quite groovy in their approached clothing, so I was lucky in that regard. But I would say that about 90% of my clothes were hand-me-downs. And I remember my mother and her friends throwing parties. So they would do swap parties and just reuse and share what they had between them. So I guess in between that, we would have seen, certainly when I was a teenager and in my 20s, I'd spend probably a lot more money buying clothes, not sustainable clothes. And now we're seeing a bit of a turnaround to that with sites like swapsies.ie. And I think a lot more people in Ireland now are starting to go back to Upshop and swapping and swapping events that we would also see here in Melbourne. So I'll just give you a few ideas of what Ireland are doing at the moment, and some of them are quite like what we would do here in Melbourne or Australia, and then there's some initiatives that might just relate back to that country. So the e-cup-on is the same as the reusable cup that we would have here, but the Irish word for cup is cup-on. So they've just tweaked it there to give it a little bit of an Irish spin, and they have different sizes and collapsible portable cups that they encourage everyone to use, and then you'll get a discount in the cafes when you go in there to get your coffee. Food to Fuel is another initiative managed by Zero Waste Alliance in Ireland, and that's potentially for bigger organisations like hotels that are using a lot of food waste. So it's basically the food waste digester that converts your food into compost in 24 hours. And then you can choose to have soil enhancer or biomass fuel used from that. So that's quite good to see it being rolled out. Another little initiative that I spoke to Reiko about a few weeks ago is called Pack It In, which is a crisp packet recycling scheme in Ireland. Here in Australia, you will call them chips, but we call them crisps in Ireland. And we would probably consume more in smaller packets than Australia tend to have bigger packets of chips. And certainly when I was growing up, a lot of what we had would be smaller packets of crisps. So that means that there's an awful lot of rubbish and waste from crisp packets. And this initiative basically looks to the community to lead. So you subscribe to getting leading one of these recycling in your local community. And the idea is then that the crisp packets are recycled back into plastic pellets and reused. And bizarrely enough, it's sponsored by Walkers, who are one of the head crisp organisations supplying crisps in Ireland. So I just used a little photo there of my brother's garden at home in Ireland. He's a organic gardener. That's his polytunnel. It's a nice misty day, I think probably in September. So he's a big advocate for zero waste also, but he won't eat anything that's not organic essentially, which is great for me. So every time I go home, I get a nice gift of organic fruit and vegetables to use. So GoZero.ie is a national zero waste directory of Ireland. The bad news is that out of Europe's worst plastic waste offenders, Ireland is ranked the worst, which is bad news. However, this GoZero.ie initiative has been set up to combat that, and it's a great resource showcasing bulk food stores, health food shops, online stores, fruit and vegetable, and stuff like that that everyone can use. So it's fantastic. And to the point of us probably ranking worst in Europe, the Irish government has recently launched their waste action plan for the circular economy. So that's 2020 to 2025, and sets out a lot of priorities for Ireland to move forward in doing better. It also sets out the challenges from COVID, and I'll speak to that a little bit more, as I'm sure that many of us have been finding it a little bit difficult to compost and what have you. So that's just a few initiatives from Ireland. I thought before I move on to music, I'd leave you with a little bit of insight from David Attenborough. And that's my local beach where I grew up in Ireland and have the privilege of going back to every time I can go home, and I swim there. And a little bit of inspiration, which I've referred to before. If you need some reading, I highly recommend this book. It will open your eyes. Okay, so that's a little bit about how I grew up and initiatives in Ireland and what I'm seeing. I thought I'd just give you a few tips on music. I do work in the music area, and thought I'd talk to this while I had the opportunity. So ceol is the Irish word for music. And I thought I'd start by giving an example of Melbourne Music Week, as I also work at the City of Melbourne, and their event in 2019 with the Festival Hub. Some of you may have attended or seen the Cubic down at Birrong Mar, and was powered with 100% renewable electricity. And then the containers that you see there in the image were filled with 100% stormwater, which was then returned to the water storages to irrigate Melbourne parks and gardens. So that's a really great example of a bigger music festival that's doing great things for the environment. In terms of how you might be able to operate zero waste when you go to your next festival, some of these are fairly straightforward, and I'm sure many people are doing them already, but I just thought that I'd point out a little few tips for you, and you can see them there on the screen in terms of BYOing your water bottle and cup and cutlery. Don't print your ticket, use your digital ticket on your phone. And I have highlighted no straws because one of the things that I was amazed at when I first came to Australia 20 years ago was everyone serving me a drink with a straw in it. And I just didn't understand why. So I think that Australia is very high consumer, or certainly has been in the past, of plastic straws. So forget it. I've thrown in a little bit of not everyone might be wearing the glitter at festivals, but certainly I know there's some festivals in the country that might be more geared towards that, and just encourage you to think about what you're putting on your face that might end up in the local waterways. And where you can, share your travel and use PT. As we know, that's become a little bit of a contentious issue now with COVID. So again, one of the challenges that we're all facing at the moment. So that's the end from me. I thought that I would finish off also, like Emily has done, with just asking you a question to get you thinking on how you can start a zero waste lifestyle. That's the Hal and Associates garden there. I have a little compost bucket that I use and I bring up to the EcoCentre to get rid of my compost and utilize their facilities. And I also volunteer with them, so I'll water the garden while I'm up there. Some of the other things that I do is shopping. I use the libraries, and I try to use the Buy Nothing Facebook pages for swapping and sharing things. So that's a little bit about me and my background. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Interesting to say about the milk bottles there, excuse me, that it's coming back. That's so great. And that you just got a picture from your aunt a few days ago. And I think milk bottles are coming back around here in Melbourne too. It's just not that popular yet, but hopefully they will get more popular in the next few years. And also about gardening, you've mentioned gardening. Emily has also mentioned gardening. food is such some essential thing that we need every day. Unfortunately, it's, you know, heavily packaged sometimes, or there's a lot of food miles and bringing that food onto your table. So having a garden and knowing someone in your family that knows how to garden, learning from them, or the people around you in the community or at the EcoCentre community garden, that's a great way to start your zero waste journey. Cool to know about the music industry as well, that they're doing a lot of work in reducing their energy uses, going renewables, and also around waste. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks, Reiko.
I'd also like to share some tips from my culture. So I'll bring my slides up. There you go. So I'm originally from Japan, born in Japan, raised in the United States. And I've been here for about 13, 14 years now. So I've actually spent most of my life overseas. But still, a lot of my values come from Japan, and there's a lot of teachings that's been ingrained in me from my parents and my grandparents. So I thought I'd start with a bento. A lot of you would know this term, bento. Bento is this kind of containered food. Bento box is the container itself. So yeah, it's typically lunch or maybe dinner. This is just a simple bento that I made for myself. You can see there's rice on the right with some red plum pickle. Actually, it's red because it's been colored with a basil, similar to a plant like basil called shiso. It's a purple leafed leaf basil family plant. So it's been colored red with the purple of the shiso, and it's a green plum that you can pickle and make pickles with. And my grandmother would make this, and I haven't tried making them myself, but yeah, I should learn from her. Then it shows the rice and the red in the middle just shows the Japanese national flag. So it's a really common thing to have in your lunchbox in our bento. And obviously packing your own lunch. It's a great way to reduce waste. Emily has also shared about the importance of knowing where your food comes from and acknowledging that and being grateful for that. And what I thought I would like to share to start with is more of a philosophy than, I guess, a practice or an activity. So I'd like to share with you this word, mottainai. Mottainai is a philosophy in Japan. It derives from Buddhism, apparently. So the teaching of Buddha of interconnectedness, that we're all supported by one another, supported by the earth elements to be alive. Mottai means something that's greater than you, so like a Buddha or God or spirit. And nai means nothing, to not have. So mottai nai is essentially it's a expression of grief or regret towards something that's lost its value and it's not been used for its full potential. So when we say mottai nai, we say mottai nai. And we say it as like a really sad thing. And an example here with the rice is that in Japan, we eat a lot of rice. Rice is a holy plant for us. We give rice to our spirits, our gods, and also our national alcohol, sake, is made of rice, and we offer that to our gods as well. At home as kids, every kid in Japan are told not to even waste 1 grain of rice because it would be an insult to our gods and the rice. So if we waste rice, we're told off a lot. We just have to pick the small grains of rice with those chopsticks. And the word mottainai, essentially what it means is to not just waste things, but it means to respect. So respect the value of what's in front of you. It also, I guess, essentially it means produce no waste. So respect the full value of what's in front of you, what's come to you, what you're using, and try to use it to the full potential of its life cycle. So instead of throwing things away, it's keeping them. So it's not getting rid of things, and it's keeping them till they're for use. It's about looking after your tools, looking after the things that you have, and making sure that they're not thrown away. So not producing waste. So it's a little bit different from, like, say, going to the bulk food store and not getting packaging. It's more about look at what you have, respect the things that you have, respect the food that's come to you, and produce no waste out of it. So I'd like you all to remember this word, mottainai. And if you see someone doing something that's wasteful, say, mottainai. Don't do that. It's an insult to something that's greater than us. And of course, an insult to our Mother Earth, who's brought the things in front of you to you. Some of the Japanese tradition that I guess comes from this philosophy of mottainai is mending techniques that's been developed in the northern part of Japan. So on the left here, we have a technique called Sashko, and it's essentially creating patterns on textiles that's been dyed with indigo. So it's very beautiful patterns, very intricate patterns that's been developed to strengthen the textile and strengthen its lifespan of your clothes. Sashko, or the other way that they looked after their clothes, is to patch things together and mend them and make it look nice. So boro is essentially, it means a rag, could be called boro. But once you stitch them together, you could also make something quite fashionable. So there's a picture at a grandma stitching together some indigo textile and a fine product, a really cool jacket and a hat that's come out of old textiles that's been stitched together. The people in the north did this because they live in really cold regions. They didn't have a lot of resources. Kimonos or textiles were really expensive back then. So they stitched things together, but they also re-dyed the textiles with indigo so that they look nice. And that's how this technique has developed. So if you search on the internet, Sashko or boro, you can learn how to do these. So try mending your clothes yourself. I've also tried a little bit myself, do some visible mending so that I can extend the lifespan of my socks and pajamas, and that's just an example there. Another way to really make use of this philosophy of mottainai is come to the St. Kilda Repair Cafe. So at the EcoCentre, affiliate group GECO runs the St. Kilda Repair Cafe, usually every second Sundays, 2 to 5 p.m., pending COVID restrictions, obviously. And it's at this Port Phillip EcoCentre at 55A Blessing Street in St. Kilda. So produce no waste, come along to this wonderful repair cafe, extend the lifespan of the things that you have, and just don't throw things away. Another wonderful Japanese technique that we use with textile is using these big cloths called furoshiki. So it could be like a 30 centimeters square, or it could be big, like 70 centimeters or a meter big. But you can basically, what it is, that it's a wrapping cloth that you can wrap a lot of things with. I like to wrap my bento box. So like on the top right there. That's usually how people would bring their bento to school or to work. No one uses a plastic bag to put their bento box in. Everyone would use a cloth, wash it and reuse it the next day. You can also use furoshiki like this when you're providing a gift for someone. So instead of using wrapping paper, find a nice piece of cloth, wrap it for people, and you can give it gifts that way. So in Japan, we like packaging. There's a lot of packaging in Japan. A lot of it is plastic in the modern days, but this is our traditional ways of packaging things. So if you have, say, some fruit that you want to bring in your backpack, you can just use a bit of cloth, wrap it around, and then chuck it in your bag. There's all sorts of ways to use the furoshiki, and if you search on the internet how to use furoshiki, it would come up. This image would probably come up for you. I got this from the Japanese Department of Environment website. They did a campaign on mottainai and furoshiki. And you can see that it's not very difficult. It's not like origami. I'm not very good at origami, but you know, I can at least do the furoshiki myself. My favorite one here has got to be the watermelon one, the third one from the top left, that you can even wrap a watermelon and bring it in as a gift. The reason why there's a watermelon is because it's a symbolic summer fruit for us, and we usually give watermelon as gifts if we're going to someone's homes. There's also a way to wrap your bottles. So in the bottom there, from the third one to the right, there's a way to wrap bottles. So if you're bringing a nice bottle of wine to your friends, in Japan, it's impolite if you bring something unwrapped. It's considered a little bit rough, I guess, and impolite. So we like to wrap things, and then you can unwrap them and show them your gift when you get there. So these are just some examples of how you can wrap things and avoid paper, avoid plastic bags, and use just a cloth that you can reuse, clean and reuse. Another thing I thought I'd share is ocha, so tea. So all three of us, Emily, Hannah, and myself, come from cultures that drink a lot of tea. And I remember growing up, we never had tea bags. We never had, that convenience culture of tea bags. Mainly, I think, because my parents and my grandparents, they appreciated the real taste of tea. And if you want to drink good tea, you've got to drink loose leaf tea. And Emily also touched on convenience culture, but that's just one way, really simple way, that you can reduce some of the waste that might go to landfill. Some of you might like matcha. In Japan, we call it omatcha, or is something that we put in the front of things to pay respects to that word or to that thing. So omatcha. I used to be in the tea ceremony club in high school, so luckily I got to learn how to make omatcha. But if you'd like to learn yourself, you can buy these kits from a local Japanese grocer. They usually have the bamboo whisk and maybe a small bowl, and they usually sell powdered matcha. So this is how you make omatcha. You take a tiny bit of powder with this little wooden, spoon that we have. You only need about 1/4 of a teaspoon, so not too much unless you want a big caffeine hit. And you put in some warm water, not too hot, but probably about 70 degrees. You don't want it boiling hot in your bowl. And you whisk it with the bamboo whisker there, and hold the whisker with your hands. It's your thumb on one side and the 4 fingers on the other, and whisk like this. So try it out. If you love matcha latte, why not just make it yourself at home? Get these whiskers, make your omatcha, and then you can add warm milk inside as well if you prefer to. In Japan, green tea is just drank straight, not sweet, just green and straight. But if you like milk and sweet things, you can add that in as well. One thing that I've been doing with my tea recently is growing my own herbal tea. So very simple. I love gardening. Everyone, Emily and Hannah has also mentioned gardening. So I'm so excited that we're all on the same page with this. But herbal tea, it's so expensive to buy, but so easy to grow. So on the left here, I have lemongrass growing. They're a plant from a hot region, so they like black pots. Black pots are a good way to grow lemongrass. They'll just keep growing and growing. It's very easy to grow. So I'll just chop the leaves off, dry them, and make my own lemongrass and ginger tea. I also grow a lot of mint. And this summer, I've been really loving making cold brew tea. So what you do is you just put cold water and your herbs or your green tea or whatnot into the cold water, and you leave it overnight. Next day, the taste has seeped through and you have a nice, refreshing cold tea. The good thing is with cold brew, if you're using green tea, it doesn't seep out the caffeine too much, so you'll have more of a lighter, fresh green tea than a strong caffeinated one. So that's my tips. Now, we've had some questions coming through. So yeah, if you have any questions, please do ask us. I might ask Hannah and Emily to pop their cameras back on, and we might want to start answering some of these questions. I'll just have a scan through. We also had some wonderful comments, people reflecting on the prompts from Emily and Hannah. Someone had said, my mom has definitely have inspired me not to take advantage of anything. Growing up, we had what we needed, but we never went over the top. So yeah, absolutely. Your parents would be a really great inspiration, and also our teachers. So it's really important that we respect our elders and listen to them. Libraries are fantastic resources. Yes, I love libraries too. Can't agree any more. You don't have to buy books. It's there for you for free to borrow. So many comments and questions. I might go on to one of the questions. I add repurpose to the 3 R's. Repurpose, love that, Mary. Always stop and think, how else can I use this or parts of it, or who else might? Yeah, I think we've all touched on some of that. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Hannah or Emily, in terms of repurposing things?
I think in response to that with the 3 R's, Bea Johnson, who's a zero waste advocate, has actually come up with the 5 R's of zero waste and has included reduce, reuse, recycle, rot and refuse. So I think that that's a great idea, repurposing. And I know Reiko spoke to doing a lot of sewing, and I also actually took that up in COVID lockdown. So I've been reusing lots of my cushion covers for other bits and pieces, making reusable cotton rounds, and it's been great. So Mary, we totally agree with you.
Absolutely. It's definitely kind of looking at how society, we've kind of come from, you know, see it, bin it, pick it up sort of thing, to the recycling was the message. And then now it's like we need to go beyond recycling and look at all these other R's. So like Hannah was mentioning about their Johnson's things. There's lots of different ones. Some people have like 7 R's, 8 R's, and it's just finding out what works for you. And I think the first thing is really rethinking and shifting your mindset into thinking, looking at an object or looking at ways and seeing how we can do things differently. And reusing is a fantastic way instead of just putting it towards landfill or recycling. There's lots of ways we can reuse or repurpose something.
Yeah, I guess I'll add respect to the R's. So that was from the word mottainai as well. Just that essence of respecting the things that supports our life, but also the greater things, the Mother Nature. And I think, we all do that in all different ways. And just to not throw things away just because it's something that you don't want anymore.
Yes, definitely. And reconnecting, another R.
I love that.
Yeah, just really reconnecting with nature. And we are part of nature. And we forget that because in society, majority of us who are part of the urban society, we are so disconnected. So really taking that time to reconnect with nature, with each other. And I think that's another R that could be included.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Reconnecting. We have also a really good question. How can we get on and inspire our friends to join this movement in zero waste? I think Emily mentioned start from where you are at your journey, and we all know that nobody's perfect. You don't have to go full on. You just start from where you are. But I think for a lot of people, there are barriers and it could be difficult. Maybe I'll start with Emily. How can you inspire our friends to join this movement?
So it's really what you were just sharing. It's from where you are. So with whatever you've got, and it's just taking the steps. So often we kind of set ourselves for this, Pinterest version of zero waste, and it's like, well, no, it's really messy. And the reality of this is, that picture looks perfect because there's been a lot of editing and a lot of, you can't see what's outside of that picture. And we really need to think about in the whole picture, in the whole scheme of things, just picking a few things and making that part of your habit. So setting little things that help you make it more convenient, become part of your routine. So with yourself and with that, when you take that action, other people see it and they get inspired by what you're doing. So through your way of doing, it's a much better way than if you were trying to preach, zero waste ways. And just, doing it and having conversations, and not to try and force your way onto others, but others will join and they'll be inspired by your passion and by your actions. So just start with yourself, your sphere of influence, and find and connect with other people as well to continue inspiring you as well.
Thanks, Emily. Hannah, would you like to add to that?
Sure, I agree with what Emily's been saying, and I think a lot of it is education and educating people who might not be aware of how they can start. And start small yourself. It's not about going away from this session and going, oh my God, I must do everything. It's about looking around and going, okay, what's the one thing that I can do now that can contribute? And then maybe think about later on down the track, okay, what's the next thing I can do? One of the things I've been doing with my friends is encouraging the composting, because a lot of my friends I'm in an apartment, they're in houses and they're not composting. They've got a big garden. And they've been mentioning rats as being the key thing that comes up for them. So it's interesting to hear the challenges that people have as well. But just start the conversation and set the example.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't agree more to both of you. Set an example, sneaking it into the conversation, and just, making it fun as well. I've been trying that myself with my friends and families around, and I've been really pleased to hear the other day my sister said, oh, I got a bokashi bin, and I was like, yes. So that was really exciting. She's in an apartment as well. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure For all of you that's already here and watching this event here today, you are taking that action, you are taking that to learn, and I'm sure your actions will inspire your friends. Absolutely. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but I would like to say a huge thank you for Emily and Hannah to sharing their stories from their heritage. It was so nice to see some pictures from their family from back home. I should have put some photos from Japan as well. It's so nice to see that, and the roots, tapping into your roots and what your what your families have been doing. There's lots of tips to learn from. We couldn't cover all of that in this short session, obviously, but respecting the things that you have, repurposing, that's not all new. It's all the things that's been happening for thousands of years throughout culture and throughout our day-to-day. So try to learn about your own family heritage as well, and what sort of ways your heritage might have reduced waste and used food and different parts of food, or grown food, and things like that. So thank you all so much for joining us today. If you've missed any of our sessions, there's a link there in the chat. You can go to ecocentre.com, CNF 2021, or our YouTube channel, EcoCentre TV, to view our sessions. So that's a wrap for the Culture and Nature Festival for this year. It's been such a pleasure to share stories from different diverse cultures all around Victoria and learn from them how we all connect to our natural environment and look after country. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I would see you next time at our future events. Thanks all.
Thanks, Reiko. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you, EcoCentre.
Thank you. Have a good day.